Yeah, thank you very much for introduction. I'm Koji Hachiyama from METI, and Tansri Dr. Rebecca and Professor Urata, and I all had worked in AREA, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. AREA is an international organization based in Indonesia and established in the year 2008. And it makes a policy recommendation based on the economic research in the ASEAN and the East Asian regions. I came back to Japan just last month after 5 years working at AREAs as a chief operating officers. And just before I started working at AREA, Dr. Rebecca left AREA to become the executive director of the APEC Secretariat. So we didn't work together. However, I was very proud that the former AREA's senior policy fellow became an executive director of the APEC Secretariat. So I went to the Singapore to greet her soon after I joined the AREAs. Anyway, today I was very happy to listen to the presentation by my honorable Tansri Rebecca and learned a lot from this presentation. In fact, I was also worked for APEC as METI officials twice in the past, from 1995 to 1996, and from 2002 to 2003. And at the time, that various efforts were being made to aim for an Asian-Pacific region with free and open trade and investment towards the Bogor goals established in the year 1994. And now, APEC has set the Putrajaya vision, which is aim for open, dynamic, resilient, and peaceful Asian-Pacific community by 2040s. And many ambitious efforts are being made. And today, it was very interesting to listen to the analysis of Japan, including the what position Japan is in, and what efforts are being made in this area. And for me, that returning to the Japan from the area, I felt that Japan seems to be blocked up. On the other hand, ASEAN, to grow significantly, I think the engine of the ASEAN's development is connectivities. Japan needs to connect more and more with the growing Asian-Pacific region. I think that today's presentation showed that Japan still lacks connectivity with the Asian-Pacific region and economic efforts utilizing these connectivities. I also think that Japan is lagging in digitalization, which is rapidly progressing worldwide. This was also shown in today's presentation. In particular, the data showed that the few people in Japan feel that digital transformation has a positive impact on the local area, local economy, and many people answer that they don't know. These results show that the important point when considering the digital transformation in Japan. And I think that it is important that residents in local areas feel the benefits of digitalization in a visible way. And we must accelerate digital transformation more in local areas to revitalize the local communities. Digitalization also makes it possible to directly connect between local areas and the world. And I think making better use of the characteristic is essential to revitalizing the local areas in Japan. Furthermore, many rural areas in Japan are becoming more and more aging society and depopulation. And I think that digitalization could contribute well to revitalize local economy compared with urban areas. For examples, public transportation is decreasing in rural area in Japan due to the labor shortage and business difficulties. And this has a negative impact on the daily lives of the elder peoples. Therefore, autonomous vehicle is expected to be an alternative of public transportation. In rural areas of Japan, many pilot projects of autonomous driving systems, such as round buses, are being conducted. The autonomous vehicle used here is sufficient at low speeds, and there is not so much traffic. So, for example, like a golf cart with a sensor attached, or the very low speed small bus is no problem at all. The important thing is that not advanced technologies, but how to proceed with social implementation or deployment. And as the social implementation progress, we can find new problems or barriers, so we can accelerate the transformation while solving those new problems. I think that Japan's not good point is that it is too cautious for the problems from the beginning. Another important point in developing digital businesses is market size. The larger market size will make a huge potential to create many and large businesses. The Asia-Pacific region has grown by creating large markets through the liberalization of trade and investment. But for further development, I think the key is to create a large digital single market. To realize this, establishment of DFFT, data free flow with trust, is essential. But there are many challenges to be overcome. We know that ASEAN is currently working on the DEFA, Digital Economy Framework Agreement, negotiation, which aims to resolve these issues and achieve the greater digital integration in ASEAN. I think that this kind of the movement could contribute to accelerate the digital transformation in the regions. Furthermore, the business sector will be the driving force behind the digital societies, and startups are expected to play a core role in this. To promote the digital transformation, it is also important to create a startup ecosystem that shows the startups to be more one after another. And I believe this is also a theme that the Asia-Pacific region will need to work together on. Next, I'd like to comment on the APEC's efforts. After watching the ASEAN for 5 years, I feel that the US-China conflict have a significant impact more and more in ASEAN as well. And it is also affecting the ASEAN policy making, which is balances the US and China. And in addition, ASEAN is also affected by the changing domestic situation in both the US and China. Therefore, I think that ASEAN is aiming more integrated region. On the other hand, I think that it is becoming more difficult to determine the direction of how ASEAN will cooperate with the global economies. Furthermore, from the global perspective, I think that it is becoming more difficult to create consensus in all aspects as the conflict becomes more serious. That is why now APEC is attracting attention. APEC has created the direction and the movement for the economy of ASEAN Pacific region based on the non-binding voluntary approach. I think that now is the time for APEC's effort to play an even greater role as an engine to drive the region. On the other hand, I also know that it is not easy to set a policy direction when there are conflicts of the discussion within APEC. There are themes such as SDGs, where many members are facing the same direction, but opinion may differ when it comes to the specific issues. There are also many themes on which it is difficult to reach a consensus, but where there is a strong demand from the businesses, such as securities. I believe that APEC's true worth will be tested in whether it can set the policy direction for the Asia-Pacific region on such difficult themes. This year's theme, chaired by the Peru, is tackling the many challenging issues, as Dr. Rebecca mentioned, such as on focusing on the informal sectors. And I hope that under the leadership of the Dr. Rebecca, this year's APEC will create a new and significant momentum in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hachiyama-san. Now, Dr. Rebecca, would you like to respond to some of the very interesting, very important points?
Yes, thank you very much, Urata-san, and thank you very much, Koji-san. Let me just quickly run through some of the questions. I think there's one on APEC. Yes, this person clearly knows that APEC meeting starting today and asked if there is a role that the Japanese business community can play in APEC. Here's the role of APEC per se. APEC has a parallel process to APEC, the official process. APEC members have the ears of the ministers and the leaders. So they engage directly with the ministers and the leaders. We, at the Secretariat, we track all the recommendations that APEC brings to the table, whether it's for the fora, whether it's for the ministers, whether it's for the leaders. So we do a proper tracking, and we report back to APEC on whether or not, where it's going, the different fora. They have, the businesses have their own expectations of policymakers. Now, policymakers tend to respond more slowly sometimes because we have got so many processes that we go through. But at least what's important is that the business community's voice is present in our fora, in our ministers' meeting. When they meet with the leaders, they have the dialogue with the leaders. So it is not trivialized in any way. And so what is the role of Japan? Well, Japan has your representatives. You have your representatives at APEC. And so they collate the views of the different business associations, and they bring it to the table, and they bring it as their own agenda to be channeled appropriately to policymakers. And, in discussions with policymakers, it's a give and take process, right? Policymakers need to understand why it's important that the initiatives that you're proposing, the work that you're suggesting that the policymakers focus on, the rationale has to be clear, and that engagement is important. And that's the value of APEC. They make sure there is consistent engagement with policymakers, with ministers. There's a proper way of channeling the voice and expectations of the business community. I mean, APEC is as strong as the business community. If we do not have the business community providing input, it will be an echo chamber of policymakers sitting there and hearing each other say nice things about their policies. But the business community brings a reality to it. Besides that, let me just also say, we have policy dialogues in APEC, workshops, capacity building sessions, where we bring in the private sector, civil society, academia. So there is enough opportunities for different voices to be heard. So, and that's the value, I think, of APEC, the kind of engagement that we encourage through the workshops, through the policy dialogues that we have. Long answer to this simple question.
That is about the APEC.
APEC. And there's this other question. I'm going to look at the trade questions. Is APEC influenced by American political parties? Is there a difference between how APEC approached by Democratic or Republican administrations? Let me just say that the Americans are just one party to APEC. They're just one of 21. And we in APEC, every member at the table has an equal voice. Every member of APEC is free to say or to share their opinion, and everyone has the right to be heard. So it's not one overpowering another. Even when the US was chair last year, the US couldn't just have an agenda on the table if the other 20 did not agree. So there is this constant conversation. It's a healthy conversation. And like you said, we are non-binding. Because we're non-binding, because we're voluntary, there is less of a posturing than if you were a binding environment. Your binding environment, you have a lot more, you're more guarded, as it were. Whereas in a non-binding, and the fact that we are all equal in the room, regardless of your political affiliation or your policy, you have the opportunity to make your voice heard. And people need not agree with you, but at least you have that opportunity to be heard.
Okay, thank you very much. That's U.S. politics and APEC. And then a question about the influence of APEC in the maybe world affairs, I guess, because APEC includes large economies such as U.S., China, an important economy like Taiwan, Russia. Is the influence of APEC in, I guess, world affairs is increasing or decreasing, and if it's decreasing, why is the case?
Yep. Here again is the focus of APEC. What is it? What's our rationale? Why do we exist? We exist, and I think the Putrajaya vision captures it very, very succinctly, a peaceful Asia-Pacific for the benefit of all our peoples. So we have to go back to that. And yes, like I said, we may have different ideologies, we may have different philosophies, we may have different ways of approaching economics in our respective economies. But at the end of the day, when we come together, there must be something that we want for our region. And I think to some extent, some of it was explained in the perception survey that we had. Folks still, even if they didn't know so much of multilateralism, they believed that multilateralism was the way to go. Having conversations, having those difficult conversations in a room, hearing each other out, I think that's the value that we bring. And then also, like I said, a key part of APEC is the capacity building function that we have. We can talk about, grand ideas of sustainability, of just energy transition. But at the end of the day, it is the policymakers who must translate all these grand ideas to policies that matter. And really, you cannot expect that policymakers have the necessary competence to do all this at one go. We need to build capacity for the policymakers themselves, and that's the value APEC brings. So forget the politics of it. Let's focus on what do we want of the region. We want just energy transition, but what if the policymakers aren't there yet? So we provide that avenue to ensure that policymakers understand what it means. How do you go about it? So having experts in the room to help the policymakers, I think that's one of the important things that we bring. Folks to understand what's going on. Yes, we are impacted by the global scenario, whether it's the Red Sea issues, the crisis at the Red Sea. Those impact the value chain, supply of goods. But it's important that we are still at the table talking about this, bringing it to the surface. It's one thing to bring it to the surface and the other to just bury it. Whereas that's what APEC provides, an avenue, a platform. Whether you agree or disagree is immaterial, but there is the platform for us to have those difficult conversations. It is not easy. It's gotten more and more difficult over the years, as you mentioned, some of the tensions or the balancing. But we at least provide policymakers with views, voices, varied voices, diverse voices, and then you go ahead and make a decision, which is best for your economy at the end of the day.
Okay, now APEC is a regional framework, Asia Pacific, right? Is there a possibility or plan to extend this relationship with the outside members like EU or, you talk about multilateralism, that is a very important part of APEC. So if you talk about multilateralism, would you think it's better maybe to cooperate with outside frameworks such as the EU?
Yeah. we are not an exclusive club. I must say, APEC is not an exclusive club. We're very inclusive, and we have engagements with OECD. We have engagement with different international organizations. They have a seat at the table. They request to be observers or guests. As I said, we have a host of policy dialogues, which are not limited to, the policy are not limited just to members of APEC, but it could be open to the region. For example, members of the Pacific Alliance. This year, because of geography, you'll be getting a lot more engagement with Brazil, for example, the Bank for Latin America. So you do get, you have, traditionally we've had IMF, World Bank, WTO, they're all part of our conversations. So, like I said, we're not an exclusive club, open to having those conversations with members who are not APEC. And for example, in 2022, a guest at the Leaders Summit was President Macron. So he brought the voice of the of the EU rather, to the leaders' meeting. So that's how we do engage with international organizations. OECD is right there. WTO is right there with us. So yeah, very close working relationships with a lot of these bodies.
Good. Well, let's see. I think these are most of the questions that we covered. But let me go back to Hachiyama-san's very, I think, important points that he made about, some of them are for Japan to revitalize our economy. Japan needs to use AI in the rural areas and so on. And one thing which I thought very interesting is startups. He talks about important startups, which I didn't think I hear from your presentation. What is the discussions on startups at APEC?
Yeah, I think that the conversation is there. I may not have highlighted it. It's when we talk of the innovation and digitalization work that we're doing at the Digital Economy Steering Group, for example. They do discuss what can we do to engage the startups to make sure you bring those, you provide the necessary environment for startups to grow. That's one area. At the SME working group, there's also discussions on how do we support up-and-coming businesses, including startups. Another stream of work is through the women and the Women's Economic Empowerment Framework, the policy partnership for women and the economy. There's also some discussion on startups. If you want it specific, because it's cross-cutting really. So a specific work stream on startups, no, but definitely it's discussed in different fora. I think the APEC also has a discussion on innovation and startups. How do you create ecosystems for them to flourish? And there's a lot of sharing of information on how different economies nurture their startups. So those are well, I may not have highlighted it, but it is happening in the various fora in APEC.
This is a rather difficult question maybe for you to respond, but this participant from the online asked what are the specific achievements of APEC other than a business passport?
Okay, it is not such a difficult question, but I think it is something that shows our lack or APEC's lack of messaging of some of the work that we've done. Just very quickly, one important work that's done was on the trade facilitation agreement. The trade facilitation agreement at the WTO had its genesis in APEC. That's one. Two, we had the environmental goods list. That whole conversation started in APEC. We have a list. We had a list. Now, again, because we are a non-negotiating body, we cannot have an agreement on the degree of what you call is the environmental goods agreement. We can't have it. So we moved it to the WTO to do it. So it's being discussed there. And likewise, last year, we came up with a reference list for services, green environmental services. Again, when you think of the work that we've done, where it comes to environmental goods, when it comes to environmental services, issue of taxonomy, issue of definitions. So we've done the work. We've come up with a way of defining this through the reference list for services, for example. And now we've done a presentation to the WTO. And again, because we do not negotiate, we bring it there and we hope, and our members who are in the WTO have been very active in pushing for this discussion at the WTO. So yes. Not just the APEC business travel card, because that's in your face, you see it.
Concrete.
That's
it's
very
easy
concrete.
To understand.
But the other work that we're doing is equally important. But maybe we do not message it as such, Yeah.
If I may, you can add maybe digital goods trade agreement. Is that initiated at APEC?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. Hachiyama-san talked about the U.S.-China kind of conflict. I'm just curious to know what's the discussions like at APEC between, these, not just only China, U.S., but maybe other economies who are not in a kind of friendly relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. We all need not agree on everything, But when it comes to the crunch, we do find middle ground, as we saw last year. Like you said, one of the questions was, how is this U.S.-driven, But really, it's not U.S.-driven because it is collective. At the end of the day, it's collective. And one would have thought that, because the U.S. was chairing APEC, that there would be a different color to the negotiations, to the statements that come out, to the initiatives. But when you look at what we went through last year and how we managed to get to consensus on the trade, the statements, the different statements, and the leaders' statement, clearly it shows that when it comes to the crunch, when it matters, we find middle ground. It is, I'm not saying it was easy, but we managed. We spent time, we engaged, we invested energy, but we came to that stage. We managed to look past our differences and focus on what unites us. I mean, it sounds very cliched, but it is true. That's what happened in the room when we were drafting agreements. When we were drafting statements and declarations. At the end, we all focused on what is important for us, what matters to us as a collective, and that's how we managed to get one. I mean, I'm sure folks will say, "Oh, no way in hell you're going to get a statement because U.S. and China positions are so distant." But we managed. So it just shows that when it comes to the crunch, APEC does deliver.
Thank you. Because of time, I think we only have one more question that we can ask. This question from the audience. This year's APEC theme is gender. What kind of discussions are planned on gender? This person is interested in this issue because Japan is consistently ranked low in the global gender index.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's not that the theme is gender. The theme is on sustainability and inclusion. That's one of the things, empower, include, and grow. On women and economic empowerment, that's something that we've been doing for a very long time. In 2011, we established the Policy Partnership of Women and the Economy. Then the Policy Support Unit measures. I'm one of those that believe what gets measured gets done. So we have a dashboard, Women and the Economy dashboard, where we track 5 specific indicators. And then, it's not quite naming and shaming, but we do say, here's where we stand on issues of gender. Whether it's voice and advocacy, whether it's access to capital and markets, things like that. So there are some areas, women in STEM, some areas we've been doing very well, but in some areas we're not doing so well. And one area where we really need to step up is on voice and advocacy and access to finance. Access to finance is a very sad story. We've done well. Quite a number of economies, women have access to digital money, what do you call digital, what do you call that? Digital pocket, whatever market, whatever it is, money, yeah? But there are 12 economies where it is not wrong, where it is not illegal to discriminate against women, for access to money, access to capital. So that means I can go to a bank, and there are some economies which will say, oh, where's your husband? And it's okay. So we've come a long way, but in this instance, we still have some economies that do not make it wrong for preventing women in getting access to finance based on their gender, nothing to do with their business, based on gender. So these are things that we at a very tangible level, the Policy Support Unit tracks this, and we share this with the ministers and say, yes, we've done good work, but gosh, we have a lot more to do. And I also share this because I have an interest in it.
Sure. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Now it's time to close this webinar. I'd like to thank Dr. Santa Maria and Dr. Hachiyama for excellent presentation and discussions. Thank you very much for your participation in our BBL seminar today.